Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm going to talk about an idea, really a sketching out of an idea here called a smart grid for education. And it really doesn't matter too much, but Tim sort of came back saying, we got to think about something that we can do in education. And I started thinking about based on my experience with Make and Maker Faire. And can I get slides up? Are they up? Okay. DIY is really the starting point for this. And do it yourself, or DIY, is I think one of the defining ideas of our time. It's a force. It is behind the participation in the web, in our own world, but it's also a belief that we can do things, that we can get access and control over technology, even over our lives, our communities, and do things that matter. Make is a magazine really dedicated to DIY, looking at it largely from a technology point of view. And in some ways, the garage band is the prototype. The garage band, like the garage inventor, how do they form? How do they find each other? How do they get to perform in front of people and share what they do? This is an older copy of Make, but these guys were using air guitars to make real music, to really create a band that made music from plastic guitars. I began getting these people together in an event called Maker Faire. We just had our 5th annual Maker Faire in the Bay Area, and also just did one in Detroit this year for the first time. We'll do one in New York City at the end of the month. And it really was bringing together all these people in the DIY community to share what they do, what they know, and talk to each other. I had no idea that so many other people would be interested in the gadgets, the processes, the methods that people gather to talk about. We had probably over 80,000 people in the Bay Area this year at our event. But it's started to get me really thinking of the event as a community-based learning event. All of the things that come to Maker Faire exist in the community. They're already there, but we can't see them. And that's one of the troubles with DIY, is it often isn't easily visible. It's out there, but it's hard to find. Just as when Maker Faire breaks down and all those people go back out in the community, they're still there, they're still doing things, but finding them is a little bit difficult. But it also made me realize, when we think of school, as JSB said, really education happens everywhere. It happens in our community, not just on a campus. It's not just a phenomena of school. One of the great things of I think, the Maker phenomena is the engagement of parents with their kids, buying kits and going home and doing things and making stuff at home. It also happens in community centers, in after-school programs. But I began looking at these organizations that were participating in Maker Faire, and I began to see that all of them were offering workshops and classes and tutorials. And these are some from Chicago when I was looking through there. But if you want to learn robotics, if you want to learn to write poetry, if you want to learn composting, these kinds of educational opportunities exist in our community. But our school systems really struggle to connect to those things, those resources that are in our community to actually enrich the education of kids. So I made a kind of a metaphorical leap that somehow alternative energy and alternative learning were about similar things. And, in some ways, one of our problems today is kids are hardwired, to a grid, to a power grid that was created, for burning coal in the case of of power. But in terms of learning, our schools bundle all of this together. And I think the opportunity of the internet is really to begin breaking out many of these things and to become more granular and to find replacements for a lot of the things that are currently bundled today. So many ways I started thinking, well, what if the best way to change our system of education is to organize all the resources that aren't in the system. And anyone could connect to sources of learning the way we want to connect to sources of power in real time. Could we actually know which sources were in use and which paths students followed from one source to the next? And could students find the learning opportunities they need in their local community or the global community through their social network? Could a new public infrastructure for learning more efficiently link more diverse sources of education and more diverse seekers of education and reconnect education to real life? Just as a point, one of the things, we have an education day before Maker Faire, and one of the surprising comments that I get from kids going to Maker Faire is, this is real. I like seeing real things. I like seeing real people doing stuff. That's not their experience in school. So increasingly, though, it is their experience of a student's life online, and we want to be connected to that because partially they're more in control of their life online than they are of their life in the classroom. So can we leverage social networks for discovery of learning opportunities? Already you see events organized in places like LinkedIn or even in Facebook. They're kind of sporadic, not really well thought out, but they're there. But, the promise would be, for a kid on a cell phone to be able to do something you can do to make a dinner reservation with Open Table, to say, I'd like to see what's going on Saturday within a mile of my home or my school or something in my neighborhood, and I'm particularly interested in learning electronics. Could we find that sort of granular learning opportunity for them? So some of the things that I think we need to have to build this, and I'm just going to rush over this. It's a data problem. So how do we organize a data format for learning events? How do we create a flow of learning events based on that data? And we can think of how RSS works for blogs. We can think of even Twitter as a flow of events that almost anyone personally or even a business like Google can tap into. We also want to think of participation. How do students self-report what they're doing? We really don't have a great record of what happens in informal education, as this area is often known. Could we create a student-controlled record of that participation? It might be something that they're simply sharing with their friends and their family, but it might be something that helps them get a job one day. It's the kind of activity that doesn't necessarily end up in a transcript or in a college application, but I think it might someday. Again, this might reflect your participation in the first robotics program or the Girl Scouts. Metering and feedback. I think we need tools really to allow this community to communicate and to share what's going on, in the sense that this is a slide from a Google Power Meter. Well, could we see what's going on in our community? How many workshops are there? How many offerings are there? Is there an opportunity for someone to step in and offer something? And I was looking at Chicago. You might organize it by neighborhood and see that this neighborhood has a lot to offer and the one next to it is missing something. And maybe you could get some of those people to move over and offer workshops at a community center in that neighborhood. So that's part of what's attractive of the smart grid idea, is to think about how metering could actually bring more sources online. And I guess just as a bit of a sermon, I think education really lacks an open platform. As an entrepreneur, it's hard to connect into education and figure out how to offer something. Even as teachers can be entrepreneurs. You can offer a music class in your community. You could offer a robotics class. How can we make it easier for them to just set up and do that? But, open source really didn't originate by going to Microsoft or IBM and saying, we need open source. It came outside of that community, and it came from individuals in the community who needed something, who ended up building a platform for themselves. And then, it began to, in many ways, cross-fertilize. But I believe that open education, or Learning 2.0, is going to have to, in a sense, be a plan B for us. It's all that we want education reform to succeed. It's not really clear that those systems will change certainly and be responsive to what's happening at a community level. So I'd like to just, again, propose a smart grid. It's almost like an R&D idea as something that could provide an open alternative platform to connect students to opportunities in informal education in their own community. Eventually, schools might be providers in this network. You know, they might figure out that what they have to offer, a class, a teacher, a workshop, could be open to the community as well. John Dewey, who fits into the MAKE profile with his learning by doing philosophy, but he also said a school must represent present life. Life is real and vital to the child, as which he carries on in the home, in the neighborhood, and on the playground. And I really feel like one of our biggest problems is that disconnect between the school and the community, regardless of the economic status of the community. And that the 21st century challenge is to integrate learning into community life, which is both local and global and physical and digital. And my goal, kind of in the maker mindset, with students, we no longer see themselves as consumers of standardized education, but they see themselves as producers of an education that they can create for themselves. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.